Okay, we are doing 5.4 in this Go section. So the Go section is always going to be like reminding you of what you learned before. So you're reaching way back, maybe last year or the year before. This particular question, I want to say, comes from Integrated 2. So it says quadrilateral ABCD is a parallelogram. And then it has all these things. Just reminding you of a couple things. These little arrows here, that means that this side, AD, is parallel to this side, CB. Okay, so does this. These double arrows mean that it's parallel to this. Okay, so CD parallel to AB. So in a parallelogram, you get all of these properties, and those properties are going to help you solve these problems here. I'm going to go over these properties maybe really quick, just so you have them in your head. Parallelogram properties. Let me make this a tad bit bigger. Really? You're not going to be bigger? Okay. And let's see this one. Okay. So the parallelogram properties, the definition says opposite. Let me like do little bubbles. Opposite sides are parallel. And that makes sense because it's called a parallelogram, right? You also should know that opposite sides are congruent, which means C, and then I'm going to mark it. So CD is parallel to AB. And if you remember, we use these little congruent tick marks. Let me do darker color. We use these little congruent tick marks to tell me that everybody who has one tick mark is congruent to everybody else who has one tick mark, right? But it's also true that AD is congruent to CB. So I can't use 1 there. I'm going to use 2. And the reason why I'm going to use 2 is if I used 1, it's basically saying that all of the sides are congruent. And that's not what a parallelogram is all the time. That's actually called a rhombus, if you remember. The next thing that I want to tell you is that opposite angles are congruent, which means that angle D is congruent to angle B. And angle A is congruent to angle C, right? The next thing that I want to remind you is that this is where language gets kind of like funny. So adjacent angles, some people call them. Some people call these consecutive angles. There's a couple of different names, but they're basically saying the angles that are next to each other. Adjacent means next to, consecutive means like following, like it follows it. So angle A and angle B are supplementary. And there's a couple more that talk about the diagonals that I won't talk about right now, just because that's all you would need to solve here. Okay, there's a couple more properties that the parallelograms have. The word properties means that every parallelogram has this. So if you think about properties of human beings, which I think is interesting, I've asked my class this before, they'll say things like eyes and nose and arms and legs. And I'll say, oh, so if a person doesn't have arms, are they no longer a human being? Right? And the answer is no. And you're basing it off of what you see. So then they come to an agreement of what are properties of human beings, what makes human beings human beings. It doesn't mean that other mammals, animals don't have it. It just means that all human beings do. Okay. And it doesn't even mean that it defines us either. Okay. So for number 13, it says given measure of angle A equals. Now this looks like funny words here. It just says that if you say measure of angle A is some letter, like let's make it X. Let's make this X. Why not? So if this was X degrees, or that was the variable X, right? And it's representing how, what the measurement of angle A, that's what this says, measurement of angle A, right? And then it says equals 3 times the measurement of angle B, equals 3 times the measure of angle B. So if the measure of angle A is X And the measure of angle B is, I'll just put Y just to be like that. I can actually replace these here and then I get an equation. Okay. So let's put that here. So this is X and this is Y. So my equation now says X equals 3Y, which seems like an equation that you can't solve, except for when you go back over here. Here, it tells us that opposite angles are congruent. Well, that doesn't help me, right? It doesn't help me because that's not telling me about these two angles here. And then this one says adjacent angles or consecutive angles are supplementary, meaning they add up to 180. And then you're like, oh, that makes sense. So if X equals to 3Y, and you also know X plus Y equals 180, right? Because X plus Y equals to 180, then you can solve that equation, right? And then you can solve this equation. And it's not showing up. So let me sync my notebook really quick. Still not showing up. So pretend that we have two equations, X equals to 3Y and X plus Y equals 180. Let me let this catch up to me. So here's our two equations, and now we have to solve this system. So the system says that we can either use substitution, elimination. Personally, my favorite is substitution because it works every time. Side note, elimination only works if there's something to eliminate. So there are systems that I can write that you wouldn't be able to use elimination on. Okay. So because it says X is equal to 3Y, I'm literally going to take 3Y and I'm going to copy and paste it every time I see an X. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it and put it instead of my X. And then I'm going to write the rest of that equation. Plus Y equals to 180, right? Oh, and then so now I can solve this equation because now look at this equation. It has one variable, one equation. I could solve this. I couldn't do anything with this one because it had two variables and this one had two variables, but together I could. So simplifying this, I would get 4y equals to 180. And then therefore y equals to 45 degrees. So this angle here is 45 degrees. So measure of angle B is 45 degrees. And then to find X, I would just plug it into this equation, which turns out to be 135 degrees. So 3 times 45 is 135. Okay, so things that you should remember, and it's okay if you don't, because we're going to review everything that you need to know, but is this, once I say this is a parallelogram, you get all of this stuff plus more. There's some stuff about diagonals, which I will put here. Oh, it's not letting me type. That I will add to this list, but for now, this is all you kind of needed to know.